The lights of Las Vegas blazed in the night, a city where dreams could be made or shattered in a single performance. For Elvis Presley, the gamble didn't pay off. The year was 1956, and Elvis, the boy from Mississippi who had taken the world by storm, was about to face one of his greatest challenges. The stage was the Venus Room at the New Frontier, and the audience was a mix of high rollers, showgirls, and entertainment veterans who had seen it all. Elvis stepped onto the stage, his nerves tingling. This wasn't the same crowd that screamed and swooned at his rockabilly shows back home. Here in the heart of Vegas, the audience was more accustomed to the smooth crooning of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Elvis, known for his wild stage presence and pelvic thrusts, was a fish out of water. Next to him were the comedian Shecky Greene, whose jokes were more suited to the older, sophisticated crowd, and Freddie Martin and his orchestra, a big band that played the kind of music that made Elvis feel like an outsider. The show started, and Elvis launched into his set. He sang Money Honey with Freddie Martin's band, trying to blend his raw energy with the polished sound of the orchestra. The audience, however, was tepid at best. They didn't know what to make of this young man with the slicked-back hair and the provocative moves. Elvis, always the performer, tried to engage them, but it was clear that he wasn't connecting. The set included Heartbreak Hotel, which ended with a passionate yell, and Long Tall Sally, where he slowed things down before picking up the tempo and letting DJ Fontana's drums go wild. Despite his best efforts, the audience remained unimpressed. Elvis wasn't just fighting the crowd. He was fighting the environment. Vegas was a world where showmanship and choreography were king, and Elvis, with his raw, unpolished act, was out of place. Freddie Bell, the leader of a novelty show, and that was also performing in Vegas, watched Elvis and felt for him. Elvis didn't do well at all, Freddie recalled. He was a good performer with a good style, but the audiences were into Sinatra. We did some rock and roll, but we had choreography and a show around us. Elvis was just singing. The night dragged on, and Elvis's performance was cut short. He only completed half of his month-long engagement before being paid off. The final performance, recorded but never released at the time, showed Elvis giving it his all, but it wasn't enough. The audience may have been too old to scream, but they were certainly too old to appreciate the kind of energy and passion that Elvis brought to the stage. But even in failure, there were glimmers of hope. Elvis and Freddie Bell became friends, and Freddie shared his version of Hound Dog, a song that would later become one of Elvis's biggest hits. Freddie had rewritten the lyrics to make them more palatable, and Elvis was inspired by the comic and choreographed performance. He saw the potential in the song and knew he wanted to make it his own. The controversy didn't stop there. Back in La Crosse, Wisconsin, after a performance at the Mary E. Sawyer Auditorium, an arts editor named James Shelton wrote a scathing article in the La Crosse Register. Shelton, incensed by Elvis's performance, called him a definite danger to the security of the United States and accused him of sexual self-gratification on stage. The article sparked a media frenzy, with churchmen, politicians, and parents joining the chorus of criticism. But despite the backlash, Elvis's star continued to rise. On June 5th, he appeared on The Milton Berle Show, where he performed I Want You, I Need You, I Love You, and Hound Dog. His performance was explosive, with the audience reacting with a mix of shock, excitement, and laughter. The controversy only fueled his popularity, and he soon found himself on the top of 6 different charts in the same week in Billboard magazine. The summer of 1956 was a pivotal time for Elvis. He was a polarizing figure, loved by millions and reviled by many. But one thing was clear: Elvis Presley was a force to be reckoned with, and no matter what challenges he faced, he was determined to keep going. The road ahead was uncertain, but for Elvis, the show must go on. Colonel Parker, Elvis Presley's manager, had a knack for making deals that sometimes seemed unfair, but always benefited Elvis's career. One such deal involved Otis Blackwell, the songwriter behind the hit, Don't Be Cruel. Parker told Blackwell that the song had to be published by Hill and Range, and Elvis had to be listed as a co-writer. For every $100 the song earned, Blackwell would receive $25. It wasn't a great deal, but Blackwell accepted it because he knew that if Elvis didn't record the song, it might never become a hit. The Jordanaires, a vocal group that often backed Elvis, played a crucial role in the song's success. They created the wordless, doo-wah harmonies that complemented Elvis's vocals perfectly. Gordon Stoker, a member of the Jordanaires, explained, "Elvis liked what we did, and we liked what he did. It was a family deal. We loved him, and he trusted our judgment. It might sound simple, but it took a lot of skill to make those harmonies work." Another song on the horizon was "Any Way You Want Me," written by Aaron Schroeder and Cliff Owens, who was actually Clyde Otis using a pseudonym. Gordon Stoker recalled, "We were all impressed with how well Elvis could sing. He had a unique voice that really stood out." The song featured some great guitar work by Scotty Moore, adding to the overall vibe. On the day, Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel were released. It was a momentous occasion for rock and roll. The single topped the charts for 11 weeks, and was a hit in both country and R&B. Colonel Parker saw the potential for Elvis to become a film star, much like Frank Sinatra. He arranged a meeting with Hal Wallis, a powerful film producer. Hal Wallis was a no-nonsense man with a sharp eye for talent. He had produced classics like Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. When Elvis met Wallis, he read from the script of The Rainmaker, but Wallis realized that a supporting role wouldn't do justice to Elvis's star power. Instead, he decided to create a film specifically for Elvis, which would become Loving You in 1957. Elvis was given a contract for 3 films with Paramount. His fee for the first film was only $15,000, but Parker negotiated hard to increase it as Elvis's fame grew. Before Loving You, Wallis leased Elvis to 20th Century Fox for a supporting role in The Reno Brothers. The film was later renamed Love Me Tender to capitalize on Elvis's popularity. Love Me Tender was set in 1865 and featured Elvis as Clint Reno, a man who marries his brother's girlfriend, thinking his brother is dead. The film had its share of drama, including a realistic gunfight where Elvis's character was killed. The ending was controversial, with Elvis's image superimposed on the final credits, singing Love Me Tender. The song Love Me Tender has a complex history. It was originally a Civil War ballad called Ora Lee, written by George Poulton and William Fosdick. Ken Darby, the film's musical director, wrote new lyrics and gave the song to Elvis. However, Colonel Parker wanted Elvis's name on the credits, leading to a workaround where Darby's wife, Vera Mattson, was listed as a co-writer. The soundtrack of Love Me Tender included other songs like We're Gonna Move and Poor Boy, which showcased Elvis's rockabilly style. Despite the film's mixed reviews, it was a significant step in Elvis's transition from a rock and roll star to a film actor. Meanwhile, Elvis's second album, Elvis, featured a mix of country and rockabilly songs. He recorded 3 Little Richard songs, including Rip It Up and Long Tall Sally. Little Richard himself was flattered by Elvis's covers, seeing them as a way to introduce his music to a wider audience. Elvis's career was expanding, and his influence was growing. He was becoming more than just a singer. He was a cultural icon. His journey from Memphis to Hollywood was just beginning, and the world was watching. Ed Sullivan had a change of heart about Elvis Presley. He realized he made a mistake by dismissing Elvis so quickly. Sullivan decided he needed Elvis on his show, and was willing to pay a high price. He negotiated 3 appearances for $50,000, which was a lot more than what other big stars like Frank Sinatra or the Beatles would have charged. The publicity Elvis got from the show was so huge that he probably could have done it for free. In August 1956, Ed Sullivan was in the hospital after a car accident. For 5 weeks, different people hosted his show. One of these hosts was Charles Laughton, a British actor famous for playing the Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was a strange choice, but Laughton had been on the show before and did a reading from the Bible that was very popular. On September 9th, Laughton introduced Elvis Presley to an audience of 54 million people. The show was a mix of classical and popular acts, but Laughton didn't do a very good job as host. He read limericks and a funny version of Little Red Riding Hood. The audience wasn't very excited until Elvis came on. Elvis was performing in Los Angeles because he couldn't leave his movie commitments, but the fans still went wild. Elvis started with Don't Be Cruel, then slowed down for Love Me Tender. Later, he performed Ready Teddy and a short version of Hound Dog. The audience loved it, even though the show was running a bit long. Some people, like Susie Quatro, were inspired by Elvis. She saw him on TV when she was 5 and decided she wanted to sing rock and roll. The Beatles' appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964 also inspired her to start an all-girl band. In the UK, The Times said that Elvis's performance was disliked by many viewers, but that didn't stop him from becoming a huge star. A police officer in California even said that if Elvis behaved like that in the street, he would be arrested. But Elvis didn't care. He was having fun. Elvis had a gold lame suit but found it uncomfortable, so he only wore it a few times. He went back to wearing it with dark trousers. He played a big show in Tupelo, Mississippi, where 22,000 people came to see him, and then he played in Texas to 26,000 people. In October, RCA announced that Love Me Tender had over 500,000 advance orders. It became the first record to enter the Billboard chart at No. 1. The B-side, Any Way You Want Me, also did well. Elvis's EP, Love Me Tender, was a big hit, and Poor Boy reached No. 24 on the charts. Elvis asked the Memphis Draft Board about his draft status. Colonel Parker, his manager, told a story about Elvis joining the Army, but it was all made up. Parker didn't want Elvis to do free concerts for the Army, so he told Elvis he should do the full training. Elvis was annoyed but didn't know the truth. In October, Elvis got into a fist fight in Memphis. He fought back after being hit first, and the 2 guys who attacked him were fined. When Elvis returned to the Ed Sullivan Show on October 28th, he performed Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender, and a full version of Hound Dog. He also sang Love Me with the Jordanaires. The show was a mix of different acts, including a children's choir from Northern Ireland, a Spanish ventriloquist, and an Austrian who could balance on his finger. Elvis's popularity was growing. A huge cutout of him was placed above the marquee of the Paramount Theater in New York, even bigger than Marilyn Monroe's. His movie, Love Me Tender, was a big success, and his music was selling well. Colonel Parker saw an opportunity to make money from fan clubs. He hired Hank Saperstein to organize them and sell Elvis merchandise. Fans could buy T-shirts, belts, watches, and more. Parker even sold I Love Elvis and I Hate Elvis buttons. Elvis dyed his hair to look like his favorite actor, Tony Curtis, and it became his new look. Elvis's personal life was also busy. He dated different girls, and his mother, Gladys, encouraged him to settle down. But Elvis was always on the road, and his girlfriend, Dixie Locke, found someone else. Elvis returned to the Louisiana Hayride for a special performance in December 1956. It was a benefit concert for the Shreveport IMCA, and tickets were $2. This was Elvis's last appearance on the Hayride, and the MC Horace Logan said, "Elvis has left the building." In December 1956, something special happened at Sun Studios. Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Johnny Cash jammed together. It was called the $1 Million Quartet. The session wasn't recorded very well, but it became a legend. Later, it was turned into a Broadway show, and it has been performed in many places, including the West End and Las Vegas. The show imagines what might have happened if the 4 musicians had a big jam session. It features 24 songs and lots of funny moments. The audience loves it, even though some parts are not historically accurate. Jerry Lee Lewis, played by Ben Goddard, steals the show with his energy and humor. Carl Perkins, played by Oliver Seymour Marsh, performs great guitar solos. The show is a celebration of rock and roll, and it keeps the spirit of the $1 Million Quartet alive. Life had always been tough for Carl Perkins. His dad, Buck, was a poor farmer in Tiptonville, Tennessee, and Carl, along with his brothers Jay and Clayton, had to work hard from a young age. They picked cotton and struggled to make ends meet. Carl was smaller than his brothers because he had been sick with pneumonia and scarlet fever when he was little. Despite the hardships, music became a big part of their lives. The Perkins brothers formed a band, with Carl and Jay playing guitars and Clayton on the stand-up bass. Their music was raw and full of the stories of their hard life. Carl's life took a turn when Sam Phillips, a music producer, heard him play. Sam saw something special in Carl and signed him to his label, Sun Records. In 1956, Carl and his band were on the rise, especially after Elvis Presley covered Carl's song Blue Suede Shoes. It became a big hit, and Carl was on his way to becoming a star. But things got complicated when the band was in a serious car accident. Carl was hurt badly, and his brother Jay's neck was broken. It was a miracle they all survived, but it took a toll on them. When they got back on the road, things weren't the same. Jay started taking painkillers for his headaches, and Carl felt the pressure of being a star. In December 1956, Carl was back in the studio at Sun Records, trying to record new songs. Sam Phillips thought it would be a good idea to bring in Jerry Lee Lewis, a young and talented piano player, to help Carl sound more modern. Jerry Lee was full of energy and confidence, but he and Clayton didn't get along. They were both strong personalities, and it led to some tension in the studio. On December 4, 1956, Carl and Jerry Lee were recording a new song called Your True Love. They were making good progress when Elvis Presley, now a huge star, walked into the studio. Carl hadn't seen Elvis in a year, and he was amazed by how much Elvis had changed. Elvis had dark hair and was even more famous, having starred in a movie called Love Me Tender. He was in town with a beautiful showgirl named Marilyn Evans, who was sitting on the piano. Elvis was curious and asked to hear what they had recorded. He loved the new song, and even played a little on the piano. Sam Phillips saw a chance to make history and called Johnny Cash, another big star, to join them. Johnny arrived, and a photographer from the local newspaper took a picture of the four of them together. The photo was cropped to show just the four men, but Marilyn was actually sitting on the piano. The musicians started jamming and singing songs they all knew. They played classics like Blueberry Hill and Peace in the Valley. The room was full of energy, and everyone was having a great time. Sam Phillips recorded the session, but it was just for fun. The musicians didn't know that these recordings would become legendary. Elvis was the star of the session, and he talked about his time in Las Vegas and how he had seen a singer named Jackie Wilson do a funny impression of him. It was a golden moment, and everyone in the room felt like they were part of something special. The session lasted about an hour, and they played over 35 songs, from country to gospel to rock and roll. Years later, the recordings were released, and people realized how unique the session was. It captured a moment in time when four of the biggest names in music came together, just for the fun of it. For Carl, it was a reminder of the good times, even though his life had been full of struggles. The $1 Million Quartet session was a magical afternoon that would never be forgotten. We were all kids, and it's strange that people analyze the historical aspects of what we did. If anything, we helped to popularize the sound of a guitar so that people no longer confused it with a banjo. Phil Everly, meanwhile, over in Britain. I've always loved rock and roll, and I think I loved it even more when I was young, because my elders really hated it. My dad thought it was terrible, especially the Everly brothers. Maybe it was because there were two of them. He said Duane Eddy was too lazy to write lyrics, and I told him that Stravinsky only wrote instrumentals. He called me a cheeky little sod and smacked me. Dad never changed his mind about rock and roll, and I don't recall anyone over 30 who liked it. One of my school friends told a careers officer he wanted to be a rock and roll singer. The officer said, "You've already got too many qualifications. You don't need to read or write." Today, parents try to enjoy their kids' music, but back then, it was different. Some of the smartest minds of our generation worked in rock music. In the U.S., we've seen how rock and roll and Elvis Presley rose to fame in the mid-1950s. But how did Elvis become a star in the UK? He never toured there, and we didn't see his TV shows. The Bright Yellow Sun label always made me excited. It meant quality music. But before 1956, when Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins had hits, Sun Records weren't available in the UK. After that, some tracks came out on the London American label. None of Elvis's Sun records from 1954 and 1955 were released in the UK at the time, so we never heard them on the BBC. Later, they came out as album tracks or singles, but we didn't know they were older songs. We thought they were new. There was a reason for this. HMV, a big record company in the UK, had a deal with RCA Victor in the US. They would give each other the first chance to release each other's music. HMV was part of EMI and did well with American singers like Perry Como and Tony Martin, who were RCA artists. In 1956, Elvis's first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, was a big deal. It was sent to Wally Ridley, HMV label manager, for release in the UK. He said, "RCA Victor sent me 6 songs. I couldn't understand a word, but Steve Scholes, a nice guy from RCA, wrote that I should release 2 of them because this guy would be huge." Wally played the record and could only hear Heartbreak Hotel. He released it, and HMV got terrible reviews. The bosses wanted to fire him. Radio Luxembourg and the BBC wouldn't play it. A band leader named Cyril Stapleton wrote in the Daily Express that Elvis's record would soon be a hit, even though you couldn't understand the lyrics. The New Musical Express, NME took ads for Elvis, but gave bad reviews. One reviewer said, "If this is singing, I give up. I'm glad I'm not in America." Another reviewer and Melody Maker said, "Rock and roll is the opposite of good jazz. It's cheap and decadent." A show business writer named Dick Tatham called Elvis incomparably incomprehensible, and said his lyrics were meaningless. Despite the bad reviews, teenagers loved Elvis. Author Ray Connolly, who grew up in Ormskirk, said, "I was obsessed with rock and roll from age 15. When I heard Elvis, it changed my life. People thought rock and roll was for morons, but I knew it was different. At university, students liked trad jazz, but I loved rock and roll." Folk singer Martin Carthy said rock and roll showed that ordinary people could make music. "I was 14 when rock and roll came along. It knocked me over. For the first time, you didn't need to be a trained musician to make music." Terry Dean, who worked at HMV in London, said, "We played Heartbreak Hotel every morning until the bosses told us to stop. I didn't know what Elvis looked like, but I knew he sounded great. When I saw him in Love Me Tender, I knew I wanted to sing like him. Wee Willie Harris said he found Elvis by chance. I heard Heartbreak Hotel at a market stall. I thought it was Johnny Ray, but it was Elvis. I bought it right away." George Harrison said, "I was riding my bike and heard Heartbreak Hotel. It changed my life." Paul McCartney said, "I saw Heartbreak Hotel in the NME and went to a record shop to listen to it. It was a magical moment, the beginning of an era. For me, it was a cold day when I was in bed. I turned on the radio and heard a vicar denounce Heartbreak Hotel. He played 30 seconds, and that was enough to change my life. I knew Elvis would be with us forever. I bought the record the next day." Heartbreak Hotel went to no. 2 in the UK, but Elvis couldn't reach no. 1 because Pat Boone, his biggest rival, had a hit with I'll Be Home. Pat Boone is often mocked, but he had good taste in songs. I'll Be Home was a classic doo-wop song that resonated with people whose loved ones were away. A friend's mom had Pat Boone's record, and she was confused by the B-side, Tutti Frutti. Little Richard's original wasn't released in the UK, but Pat Boone's version had catchy nonsense lyrics. Who were La Bostrie and Pennyman? How could they write such silly lyrics? Rock and roll was more than just music. It was a revolution that changed our lives. The summer of 1956 was a turning point in the world of music. EMI, a major British record label, had the rights to release songs from Capitol Records, an American label. One of the most shocking and exciting records they released was Bebopalula by Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. The song was wild and intense, with lyrics that were hard to understand, making it even more mysterious and thrilling. The NME, a popular music magazine, reported that the BBC had banned the B-side, Woman Love, because it was too suggestive. This only made people more curious, and the record became even more popular. Gene Vincent was just as wild as his music. He looked haggard and older than his age, giving off the impression of a life lived to the fullest. His follow-up single, Race with the Devil, told a scary story about a car race with the devil. The song was so intense that it made it into the top 30, and people couldn't get enough of it. It was unlike anything they had heard before, and it left a lasting impression. Meanwhile, Little Richard, another American rock and roll legend, finally made his debut in the UK in November 1956. His first release, Rip It Up, was a bit overshadowed by Bill Haley and his Comets, who had a hit with the same song. However, when Long Tall Sally and Tutti Frutti were combined on one single, it shot up to no. 3 in early 1957. Little Richard's wild stage presence, with his greasy hair and flamboyant style, was a shock to British audiences. He played the piano with such energy and passion that it was hard to believe anyone could be that intense. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was everywhere in 1956. EMI, trying to maximize profits before losing the rights to release Elvis's music, flooded the market with his singles. From Heartbreak Hotel in March to Love Me Tender in December, Elvis had a string of hits that dominated the charts. By early 1957, he had his first UK No. 1 with All Shook Up, and by November he had 7 songs in the top 30. The intensity of his music and the sheer number of releases only added to his legend. The British music scene was trying to catch up with the American rock and roll wave. Artists like Tommy Steele and Cliff Richard emerged as the first British rock and rollers. Tommy Steele, a young merchant seaman, became known as the boy next door and had a hit with Rock with the Cavemen. However, his style was more lighthearted and less threatening than Elvis's, which made him less of a threat to the American king of rock and roll. Cliff Richard, on the other hand, had a more serious and charismatic presence, and he eventually became the face of British rock and roll. The BBC, still cautious about the new genre, created a show called 6.5 Special to cater to the growing teenage audience. Directed by Jack Good, the show featured Tommy Steele and other British artists, but it struggled to capture the raw energy of American rock and roll. The BBC was skeptical about the longevity of rock and roll, and they often clashed with Jack Good over the content of the show. Despite the challenges, 6.5 Special had a significant impact on the British music scene, introducing many young people to the new sound. The British music industry was also cautious about covering Elvis's songs. Artists who did, like Shorty Mitchell and the Canadians, often had to change the arrangements to fit the British market. Clinton Ford, a folk and jazz musician, had a hit with his version of Old Shep, but it was a far cry from Elvis's original. Despite the challenges, British artists continued to experiment with rock and roll, laying the groundwork for the British invasion of the 1960s. By the end of 1957, the British music scene was bustling with new talent, and rock and roll had become a permanent fixture in the charts. The American influence was strong, but the British artists were starting to find their own voice, setting the stage for a new era in music. On January 4, 1957, Elvis Presley had to go to Kennedy Veterans Hospital in Memphis for a physical exam to see if he was fit for the military. He was classified 1A, meaning he was fit to serve, but he wasn't called up right away. Colonel Parker, his manager, had some discussions about the details. Elvis didn't want to lose his superstar status or be barked at from dawn to dusk, and his mom, Gladys, was worried about him getting hurt in the military. Elvis once mentioned that he liked stuffed teddy bears, and his fans took this seriously, sending him 282 teddy bears. He thanked them on the Ed Sullivan Show, which encouraged even more fans to send teddy bears. Eventually, these were given to children's hospitals. Elvis performed on the Ed Sullivan Show on January 6, 1957, but this time, Ed Sullivan had a change of heart. He was worried that Elvis might be wearing something under his clothes to make him look more manly. There's no proof that Elvis did this, but Sullivan decided to only show Elvis from the waist up. This made for a strange performance. Elvis looked more manic than sexy, and the puffed sleeves didn't help. The setting was odd too, with Elvis performing in front of a musical motif and the Jordanaires dressed as tour operators. Elvis returned later in the show to sing Too Much and When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold Again. He closed with the spiritual Peace in the Valley, which had been a hit for Red Foley in 1951. The show also featured a great performance by British ventriloquist Arthur Worsley with his dummy Charlie Brown. Ed Sullivan announced that Elvis was about to film a movie called Loving You in Hollywood with Hal Wallis. Before that, Elvis was planning a charity show for Hungarian relief. Sullivan praised Elvis to the parents of America, calling him a fine, decent young man. Elvis encouraged people to help Hungary, which had rebelled against Soviet rule, and he was made an honorary citizen of Budapest. Within a week, RCA released Too Much as a single. It was originally recorded in 1955 by Bernard Hardison, and it wasn't a hit at the time. Elvis saw its potential, though, and recorded it with a guitar solo from Scotty Moore. Scotty recalled that they had played through the song a few times, and when they tried it again, he got lost but kept playing. Elvis liked the take and said, "You're gonna have to live with that for the rest of your life." Despite the sluggish beat, Too Much topped the Billboard chart. The B-side, Playing for Keeps, was a country ballad written by Stan Kessler. It made it to No. 21 on the Billboard chart. Colonel Parker usually didn't credit anyone but Elvis on his records, but he made an exception for the Jordanaires. They were a well-known gospel group, and Presley was interested in making a gospel album. The Jordanaires brought a doo-wop sensibility to Elvis records, and their harmonies were memorable on songs like Don't Be Cruel, All Shook Up, and Teddy Bear. Elvis' family loved singing gospel songs together, and there might be tapes of them singing that his estate will release someday. The Jordanaires also worked with other artists like Ricky Nelson, Jimmy Dean, and Conway Twitty. They made many gospel albums and singles, but mainly for a gospel audience. Elvis was already showing signs of becoming a more versatile entertainer, and Colonel Parker saw the potential for him to develop beyond just rock and roll. However, there was still a lot of money to be made from rock and roll, and that's where Elvis would focus for the time being. Elvis Presley's career was a mix of gospel and rock and roll, reflecting his deep roots in both religious and secular music. In January 1957, he spent 10 days in radio recorders in Hollywood, working on songs for his upcoming film, Loving You, and other potential singles and album tracks. The sessions were packed with a variety of music, from the emotional gospel song, I Believe, to the raucous, All Shook Up. His band, including Scotty Moore, Bill Black, and DJ Fontana, along with the Jordanaires and pianist Dudley Brooks, helped create a diverse and dynamic sound. One of the standout moments was his rendition of Peace in the Valley, a song that showed Elvis's exceptional vocal range and emotional depth. RCA recognized the broader appeal of these gospel songs and planned to market them to a wider audience. Despite their beauty, many of these songs were largely unknown outside the South and were virtually unheard of in the UK. All Shook Up became the biggest hit from these sessions. Written by Otis Blackwell, the song had a double meaning, depending on whether you took the clean or dirty version. When released as a single, it paired with That's When Your Heartaches Begin, a dramatic ballad that highlighted Elvis's skill in narrative singing. His ability to blend singing and speaking was evident, showing his versatility as a performer. Elvis also recorded a mix of R&B and country songs, including the raunchy One Night of Sin, which was later toned down to One Night for a more acceptable release. His version of Blueberry Hill and I Need You So showed his appreciation for other artists like Fats Domino and Ivory Joe Hunter. The sessions for Loving You were extensive, with dozens of takes for each song. Elvis's enthusiasm and the fun he had in the studio were evident, even after numerous takes. The film required precise performances, and the team worked tirelessly to get it right. Despite the effort, the results were impressive, and the film score was later released as a double CD. Elvis's success with RCA in 1956 was groundbreaking, with 12 million singles and 3 million albums sold in his first year with the label. This success brought him both praise and criticism. Some older musicians, like Louis Armstrong, saw potential in collaborating with him, while others, like Frank Sinatra, criticized the brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression that was rock and roll. In March 1957, RCA released All Shook Up as a single, which topped the U.S. charts for 8 weeks. The song's success was overwhelming, selling 2.3 million copies. However, Elvis's live performances were often overshadowed by the screaming fans, making it difficult to hear the music. This intensity of his fan base pushed him further into his private world, and the so-called Memphis Mafia began to form around him, a group of loyal friends and associates. In April 1957, Elvis moved his family to Graceland, a mansion in Memphis. The move was necessitated by the lack of privacy at their previous home. Graceland, named after Dr. Thomas More's daughter, Grace, was a sprawling 23-room house on 13 acres of land. Elvis transformed the property, adding a wall for security and painting the house in a striking blue and gold. The decor was a mix of high and low, reflecting the sudden wealth and the tastes of a family from humble beginnings. Graceland became Elvis's sanctuary, a place where he could retreat from the chaos of fame. However, it also became a symbol of his isolation. His mother, Gladys, struggled with the new lifestyle, drinking heavily and feeling like a prisoner in her own home. Elvis's relationship with his mother was strained, and he was protective of her, especially when it came to defending her against accusations of alcoholism. As Elvis's fame grew, so did the pressures on him. Colonel Parker, his manager, saw Elvis's induction into the Army as a public relations opportunity. He approached the military, suggesting that Elvis's service could boost recruitment. For Elvis, it was a 2-year break from his career, but it also offered a chance to show that he was a good all-American boy. Elvis's impact on music and culture was profound. He helped bridge the gap between black and white audiences, contributing to the desegregation efforts of the 1960s. His music brought people together, making it colorblind for those who listened. Despite the challenges and controversies, Elvis Presley remained a pivotal figure in the world of rock and roll, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire generations.